Hello and welcome to the 300th edition of the Media Club. I'm your host, Matt Deegan. In the club today, long hours and broken turnarounds. Our TV and film crews being squeezed to breaking point. Film critic and broadcaster Rhianna Dhillon join us to look at the issue. Plus, how is the Oscars TV show doing in its search for a younger audience? Also on the programme, City AM is one of the last free sheets standing. Editor Christian May is here to reveal its staying power and how the finance paper is expanding beyond London. All that plus the BBC gets another grilling from MPs. Channel 4 News gets caught up in the Gaza doc controversy. And in the media quiz, our pundits try and score a perfect 10. That's all happening in this edition of the Media Club. Come on in. So welcome back to the Media Club. Before we get into the stories of the week, Christian, welcome to the club for the first time. Nice to have you on the sofa.
It's very nice to be here, thank you.
No worries. Who would you like to add to the membership? Who would be your plus one to join the Media Club this week?
Well, this is interesting because I know for a fact that they won't come. But so with my business journalism hat on, forgive me, I'm going to talk about, I would bring in Games Workshop.
Okay.
Specifically the CEO of Games Workshop. Now, I'm not a Warhammer fan or a gamer in that sense, but as a business journalist, we've watched this company, which has... Their share price has surged like 50% over the year. They smashed into the FTSE 100 last year, one of the most successful listed businesses in the country now. And they're worth about £5 billion. I love everything about the business. So their bricks and mortar stores, the kind of, the relationship they have with their customers. But here's why I think is just really interesting from a media perspective is that they don't really do any. And the chief executive, who's worked at the company for about 25 years, is unknown. He's never even been photographed. and
Very unusual.
And they put a statement out to the market yesterday, again a market update saying how well the business is going. It was 49 words. Most of them are, these companies have reams of financial advisors and PR advisors, and they write these great long statements all about their purpose and what they're doing on the side. And these guys just said, "Yep, sales are up, profits are up. Thanks very much." So there's sort of a conundrum from the media perspective. As I admire that brevity, but at the same time, obviously, I would like to at least get a photograph of the chief executive.
Well, let's get him in and shake him down after a beer. Good addition. And Rhianna, welcome back.
Thank you.
Who'd be your plus one?
I know this is a bit sort of, inside of baseball, but I am going to bring Nick Grimshaw, as he has just had a very successful launch with the BBC Six Music Breakfast Show, and Lauren Laverne, obviously massive shoes to fill. But also I used to work with Grimmy back at Radio 1, and just seeing his trajectory and how he has kind of really matured in his taste, the way that he knows how to talk to different audiences, like I really admired that, and I think he was such a great choice, and I think he's already smashing it with all of their guests, and it really feels like...
And it's a tough audience. I mean, Six Music listeners are very passionate about their station.
They really are. The Six Music Daddy caps I've seen. Have you seen these?
No, I haven't, I confess, but I feel like I could wear one.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? I think they are the must-have accessory of the year.
And we've got two great podcasts as well, the Dish podcast and Sidetracked as well.
Yes.
Which I think he was interviewing someone in the back of a cab after the Brits.
Brilliant. I mean, that's kind of what he does best, right? Like guerrilla interviews, I think.
Yes, they can both join. Very happy to have them on our rolls. Right, first up this week, our film crews being pushed to breaking point, while the broadcasting union BECTU believes so, with new research suggesting an uptick on what is known as broken turnarounds. Rhianna, what's a broken turnaround?
So this is basically when employers require their employees who work on a film set to sort of return to work with less than an 11-hour rest window.
Right.
And this seems to be happening more and more often. And I think we all tend to glamorise the film and TV industry generally anyway, of course. It's film stars, of course. It's beautiful, it's glamorous. But actually the reality is it's such hard work. It's such long hours. There is barely any glamour when it comes to working on a film set. Unless you're the actor, and actually even they would argue that sitting in a trailer and waiting and, or doing the same take 20, 30 times is not glamorous. But this is now becoming even more of an issue. I think film crews are being stretched to breaking point. And it's a really odd situation to explain, because there does feel like there is a feast or famine. If you work in the film or TV industry, you'll be hearing about this crisis at the moment, and that shows just aren't getting made.
Yes,
There
and
isn't
working
enough money.
is important to get work and tough to get work at the moment.
Yeah, that it's really difficult. But actually, it also turns out that there is a sort of dearth of particular skills, which means that the people who, I don't know, who work in costume or, you know, set design are being pulled really, really thin and pulled from all angles and are expected to work with a really, really short turnaround.
I mean, Christian, we've got a load of media people who listen and they know that the media sector, all of it, can be quite tough on employees. It's not really a 9-to-5 job, is it?
No, it's not really, no. I mean, I don't have much experience of film and TV. I'm trying to think. I mean, my sister-in-law had a long career in film behind the camera. And I do remember my wife is a very close friend who's an actor and said to her one day, do you want to come with me? I've got a film on location in Romania, I think it was, for, you know, a week or two. When you come out for a few days, it'll be fun. And my wife, you know, there were some unknown people in this film and she thought this will be fun. And she quickly discerned that it was about the most boring environment to be, because precisely the people are working incredibly hard, often to the outside, to the untrained eye, not a lot going on, but obviously there is. It was, you know, it's not how civilians might picture it. I mean, in my own industry, I mean, it's, you know, it's fashionable to say that all media, all news is 24/7. We don't quite have the resources at City AM to do 24/7, but we're not far off about 18/7, put it that way. So when I first did this job, you know, the rhythm was quite predictable. I worked Sunday to Thursday, 10 a.m. to about midnight. And actually, those were the hours that led after 5 years for me to leave, find a new rhythm in life. But I'm back now, and the rhythm is different because we're so much more digital focused. So that previous rhythm was very much about producing 5 newspapers a week. The newspaper went to print at 1 a.m. That was the way of it. It's changed now. And obviously, you know, we like to have a rota that stretches people across the start of the day through to the end of the day. And from a business media perspective, you know, lots of parts of the world, important parts of the world, waking up and starting work. Markets start to trade, perhaps as London winds down, and we need to be across that. So, yeah, it can be quite punishing. There's no doubt about it.
Do you think newer employees, kind of more sort of Gen Z type employees, have a tougher view on this than maybe we had when we were in the industry? I
think you do see that, but it's also the case, I think, that by the time somebody gets a job in a newsroom as a journalist, they've sort of almost proved themselves, if you like, in the sense that they have probably fought their way into it. It's very difficult to get into the career, into sort of full-time paid journalism, and so I think, you know, City AM's model has always been and remains the case that we have quite a lot of young, bright, hungry reporters who are perhaps at the start of their career. And I think, you know, those, I mean, I wouldn't like to guess about people's circumstances, but if you consider that perhaps they haven't got families yet or children, or they're still being able to rent a flat with a few friends in London, it's not like, you know, a different demographic who's got wider responsibilities and longer commutes. But you know, that's me now, by the way. But for a lot of my reporters, that, you know, thankfully they're still extremely hungry and prepared to put in the hours because they've chosen this career. And I would like to think, whether it's just at City AM or anywhere, that you know, they're determined to make the best of it.
I mean, Rhianna, BECTU are sort of pressuring PACT, aren't they, to try and encourage there to be sort of slightly tougher rules on this? Yeah,
they're pushing for like time and a half for any time there is broken turnaround. You know, I think they really are trying their best, but there does seem to be a bit of a disconnect between PACT and BECTU at the moment. About 40% of people who were surveyed said that they had been asked to break turnaround, and it was tough at the moment because you don't want to cause a fuss because there's not a lot of work going. Exactly, like there is a crisis, and we keep being told this, and you know, if you do, but this is the same, I think, with any, but especially in the media. I mean, you know, even working at the BBC, I was sort of constantly told if I ever sort of dared to complain or question anything, that there would be somebody right behind me to take my place. And that was just, you know, that was as a film critic, let alone if you, and I was like the only person doing that job. Whereas if you are somebody in a huge team, that you could easily be, you are told that you could so easily be dropped and somebody else could be found in your place. I think in the media sometimes you go back and think about your own career. Yeah. And you can go two ways on that. You can go, well, I worked hard and I worked long hours, so why shouldn't this lot? It is a privilege to be doing this job. And then the other side of it, you kind of come from well, we've all grown up a little bit actually, and maybe we should think about work in a slightly different way. And we understand mental health a lot more than we did 20, 30, 40 years ago. And we are trying to create kind of better working experiences for the generations who are coming up like below us. We don't want them to go through the same things that we did in a negative sense. I don't feel like people need to prove themselves. They shouldn't have to prove themselves in the same way. They should be able to do their work because they love it, because they're hungry for it, not because they're so desperate and that if they step a toe out of line that they will immediately lose their career.
Well, more on skills a bit later on. And more streaming levy developments as the BBC's Director General Tim Davie faced MPs on a Culture Select Committee on Tuesday. Christian, this is the idea that streamers, so people like Netflix, should pay a levy for local content. Did you see what Tim Davie's view about levies were?
Yeah, I mean, this has reared its head for a long time, hasn't it? And I know that particularly in some European countries, the regulations are much tighter on, France is a good example. I mean, France love all this. A nice law that says 20% of content needs to be made here and 10% there, etc. So I understand the dynamics of the debate. I suppose I'm a bit of a sort of free market liberal when it comes to this sort of thing. And notwithstanding some of the conversations we're having about what it means for people who work in the sector, in aggregate terms, I tend to sort of try to favour an approach that lets the market decide where content is made and who.
And these companies are investing large amounts of money.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, this is related to the conversation we were having about the labour market in that sector. My inbox is overflowing with people trying to point out to me, that the creative industries are the new powerhouse in the UK. That our studio production is up and up, our square footage of studios is up. All these great jobs, all this great value add to the economy, etc. So, on the one hand, again, it's in aggregate. We can see that argument, but then on a more granular look, you can start to see where it's perhaps leaving some people behind or not working. When it comes to the idea that people who already pay their monthly subscriptions for whether it's Netflix or Amazon or Disney or Discovery, etc., the idea that there might be a fresh levy on top of that. I think on the one, it's interesting to consider what it might mean on the one hand to go into a pool to support perhaps the next generation of talent or different routes into the industry, skills development. That's one thing. The idea that you just say that the BBC licence fee is now going to also be levied on your Netflix subscriptions is obviously for the birds.
Rhianna, always an issue about BBC funding, but also about funding of local content. It's kind of interesting, like what is local content? Is it about things that are filmed here or set here, or is it just stuff that wouldn't be made if it wasn't for some extra penny?
I guess it's about universal appeal. So, for example, something like Wicked was filmed here, and so many people who worked on the film were British. Not all of them, obviously. The major talent. Of course, you have Ariana Grande, American; John M. Chu, the director, American; Cynthia Erivo, British. But obviously, a lot of the people sort of behind the scenes are British. And so, yes, of course, that's doing incredibly well for some of those specialist skills that we were saying earlier. Really need to have like the kind of money invested into them, those special skills. But Wicked, as we know, is a universal film. It does incredibly well across the world. If we're talking about smaller, more local stories, I think that's where it starts to fall down a bit. Harry Potter is always going to get made, and that's going to be made, kind of British funded and on British soil. But smaller stories, for example, like Shuggie Bain, which that was the Booker Prize winner a couple of years ago, that's really struggling at the moment. That is in development, but it's sort of stalling. It's A24 who are helming it. But because they know that actually perhaps the universal appeal of this very localised Scottish story is not going to do well in America necessarily, and that's where everything starts to kind of crumble and fall down.
I mean, there's always been an intervention, hasn't there, in media production. The government has decided that there should be public media, happens to be generally driven by the BBC, and there is a mechanism, be it one that not everyone's happy about following. I mean, should the government get out of the way? Should we leave all of this to the market?
Well, the BBC is as ever, has got its own great successes and advantages and its own set of problems. It is a unique part of that ecosystem. When it comes to the other production companies, the other streaming services, I think your point is really interesting, which is that if you're talking about something which, to one degree, so it doesn't matter where it's made because it's enjoyed all over the world. And that's the product, and that's where it comes. Actually, of course, we know the government's put in great incentives for films to be made here, and look at the extent to which companies like Canal Plus take advantage of that. And you could say the policy is working. It's attracting people here, lots of things being made, etc. So I think think the right sort of balance of incentives and regulations is the way to go to ensure that what we keep being told about the jewel in the crown of our economy these days being that sector, has got a bit of longevity.
I was interested in the tax breaks. I think we're about £1 billion worth of tax breaks to TV and film producers, which actually, when you compare to what the BBC gets, which obviously is sort of about 4 billion, it's less, but it's a significant chunk. And again, that's money that kind of comes out of general taxation that perhaps people don't necessarily think about as funding public media, but it's a big chunk of
it is.
Cash.
I mean, the policy's matured somewhat, you could say. You remember not that long ago, it was perhaps mostly associated with various tax schemes that various individuals were caught up in, and films that never got made and were never intended to be made, but existed in an accountant's top drawer. That's that sort of thing. Obviously, we've got to keep an eye on that. But otherwise, I think there is a place for government to incentivise, and as long as it doesn't over-regulate, I think this is ultimately it's a free market, and B, this is a creative industry which is very responsive, and needs to be responsive. I would argue it needs to be responsive to what people want to watch or read or listen to. I do accept that there's a separate argument to my mind of the kind of subsidised and supported parts of that industry, output that wouldn't be created or put in front of an audience were it not for some specific support, and I think there's a place for that. But ultimately, we want to ensure that we're the right place to continue to be successful for a very competitive, globally successful industry.
Well, also in the hot seat at the Select Committee was BBC Chair Samir Shah, who said the issues around their recent Gaza documentary were a dagger to the heart to the organisation's impartiality. Christian, Channel 4, I think, indicated this a little bit this week as well with some of their material too. When you're an editor and you're at the top, you've got to trust what comes below, but you've also got to decide when you try and find out some information. It's a tough position for anybody.
It is. Trust but verify is a pretty good motto, and I'm sure journalists and editors the world over will try and live by that. Clearly, when it comes to the BBC, I know you discussed this issue on this show previously with other guests. If it's possible to park the kind of inbuilt sensitivities around the subject matter and just look at it from a production and journalistic process perspective, there was a big mistake made. It should not be the case that you're able to end up with somebody being interviewed if you're either unaware or concealing, or I'm not quite sure how it panned out, about the identity or the associations of quite a key part of your journalistic output. It's just, there was a clear breakdown in processes, which is why it led right to the top, as you say, with the BBC acknowledging that this was a catastrophic error. Channel 4's involvement a little bit different. They've, I think, revealed or rather acknowledged that they have also interviewed the child in question in some of their own news output, and have now gone back and identified the child. I get it, and I think the sort of the news output is one side, the big documentary focus is another, and it was a big mistake made, which again, to try I don't want to jump into the intricacies of the subject matter, the debate itself in Israel, Gaza, but on a topic as sensitive as that, there is a heightened requirement for good processes, good editorial clarity, good judgment, because once that product is released, it's going to do its job. It's going to spark debate. That's what it's designed to do. That's what great journalism is designed to do. And the fact that debate has now moved to the side of questions as to how it was made and who knew what and who's fallen short of standards is obviously deeply regrettable.
Rhianna, there's been some kind of awards knock-on to this as well, hasn't there?
So, first of all, Channel 4, you're absolutely right about the sort of the difference between the sort of big documentary and also the just like the news packages. But it seems that Channel 4 were presenting this child under a different name. They were pretending that his uncle was actually his father. So there was a sort of there is a murkier...
Well, I didn't quite appreciate that. Yeah.
There is a bit of a murkier depth to this, and they were aware of this. They've been aware of this for months, and it's only just really come to light. So, but I think this is a really kind of telling time, isn't it? For
but also, if it wasn't the topic, there were mistakes that happened always that get brushed under the carpet.
You wonder how much has been brushed under the carpet over the years, and this is only really coming to light because of the sensitivity of the subject. But the Royal Television Society, who were going to give awards out to journalists specifically who have been reporting on Gaza have pulled that. They've decided, the award ceremony is coming up really soon, I think in a couple of weeks, and they've decided that they are just going to step away from that.
Yes.
And they are, obviously the crisis is still going to be discussed, and it's still going to be rewarded in other ways, the coverage of it, but they just don't want a kind of dog in this fight.
Yeah, someone be dragged in to the issue. Well, still on journalism, and just before the break, Paul Marshall is planning a journalism school, apparently. This is The Guardian, suggesting this week that The Spectator and GB News owner is looking to fund training for journalists outside the current schemes. Not a lot of information about this at the moment. One hand, bit of a view that maybe raising some money around people that support more right-wing titles, or journalists who have been successful in right-wing titles. I think he was asked, and he said, it's much broader. It's much broader than that. But I was looking at it, and in France, a similar thing happened. Some billionaires kind of bought a very famous journalism school, and some of the views of that are kind of are mixed. Would you like to go to the journalism school from Paul Marshall?
Well, I'm just thinking about it. If it's as nice as his Unheard Club in Westminster, then I'm sure it would be very enjoyable. So this is the first time hearing about it, but my instinct is I'd be surprised, and I've come back and be proven wrong, I'd be surprised if he's talking about setting up a school for right-wing journalism. So you teach journalism, I've been through formal journalism training, and over my previous years and current stints at City AM, I probably hired 50 or 60 young journalists at the start of their career. And so I've got a reasonably good handle on where they tend to come from, and not to put too fine a point on it, and not to dismiss people who fall into this category, because I've got a few and they're very good. If I wanted to staff my newsroom fully with people who went to Oxbridge and then did a master's at City, I could do that. The truth, of course, is I try very hard not to do that. Now, I fell into journalism quite accidentally. I did do a master's at City about 10 years ago or thereabouts, but I did not then go and become a journalist. I did something else. So my route in was unconventional in that sense, and I don't think I got the job because I'd done my master's in broadcast journalism. So I've always tried very hard to bring people into the industry from not just different backgrounds, but different routes. And so people who were looking for a career change. I've hired a journalist who's now one of the most prominent business journalists in the country, but he came to me at City AM being disillusioned with his career as an accountant and saying, I'd like to try my hand at something else. Also, I've hired somebody who was working as an electrician but was determined to get into financial journalism. So I think once you get in the room with someone and start talking to them, there's a lot more to an individual than the sort of formal routes and hoops that you might want them to jump through. So if Paul Marshall is interested in expanding routes into journalism from people who didn't go to Oxford and didn't go and do a master's, I think that's really important and to be welcomed. I mean,
Rhianna, it is difficult sort of socio-economically to get into journalism and the media more broadly.
Yes.
It's always been tough, and it doesn't seem to be changing super fast.
It's so hard because, as you say, I'm teaching at City myself. I never went myself, but I am teaching there, and I'm teaching film and TV journalism specifically. And it's really difficult to sort of tell the students that actually this is so tough, and it's getting tougher, and that your annual turnover is going to be so much smaller than it kind of ever was. That's getting crunched and crunched. So you're going to have to get other jobs. You're going to have to do so much of this for the love of it and not for the money. And that's a really difficult thing to tell people. Do they get the idea of a portfolio career, or are they hoping to be you on the radio? I think they are. They understand that they have to be multi-hyphenate journalists. But they might have to be working in shops and retail and cafes, until they maybe break through in other ways. But it's quite a difficult thing to tell the next generation that, oh no, we messed this up. We messed this up quite badly for you guys. Sorry.
Okay, when we return, Oscar's chat and a deep dive on City AM after these messages.
Hello Media Club listeners, Patrick here from Podcast Discovery, the podcast marketing company, where this week we've been thinking about podcast memberships. They can be a great money spinner for your podcast, but are you ready for it? If you have a sizable audience, there's a good chance the most loyal would be willing to support you with their hard-earned cash. But in return, they'll be expecting bonus content, ad-free or early episodes, and discounts on things like merch and live shows. For advice on how to keep up or anything else to do with podcast marketing, head to podcastdiscovery.com. That's podcastdiscovery.com.
Where do you listen to your podcasts? Maybe on the commute, in the car, or you might be watching me on your screen now. Hello. Here's a surprising fact. More people than ever are watching podcasts on YouTube. So if you're thinking about starting a podcast or already have one, adding a video element could open up a whole new audience. That's where Podshop comes in. With expert engineers, a purpose-built recording studio and top-tier equipment, Podshop makes it easy to create high-quality video content that helps your podcast reach a wider audience. So whether you're new to podcasting or a seasoned pro, Podshop Studios is the perfect setting for your video podcast. And for a limited time, enjoy 25% off your first booking at Podshop Studios with the code MEDIACLUB. Don't miss out. Visit podshoponline.co.uk today and take your podcast to the next level. Welcome back. Here's what we've been talking about in the Media Club this week. GB News has won a decisive victory over Ofcom, with the High Court ruling the regulator overstepped its powers when it censured Jacob Rees-Mogg's show on 2 counts last year. Ofcom now seeks to change the broadcasting code to clarify if a politician can host a show with breaking news. Very rare for Ofcom to be beaten in court. Satirists are mourning the loss of producer Bill Dare, who died this week in an accident whilst on holiday. He was 64. Dare's known for his work on Spitting Image and The Now Show, and celebrated Radio 4's Dead Ringers, hitting 25 years on air. And Peppa Pig will have a new sibling this summer. The voice of Mummy Pig, Moena Banks, revealed the news on Good Morning Britain this week. On behalf of all of us here at the Media Club, congratulations to all of the Pig family, but especially to the Hasbro merchandising team. Right, Rhianna, we mentioned the RTS Awards, but it was also the Oscars this week.
Yes, don't I know it?
What did you think of it as a ceremony, or as a bunch of winners?
Oh, it's such a mixed thing every year about kind of commenting on the Oscars, and I feel like I always say the same thing, and that it's always too long and it's always really cringy, and you get moments of brilliance in the Oscars every year, and then you get moments that just make you want to like crawl into a hole and die and regret ever becoming a part of this like really shallow world. So yeah, and this was no different. Conan O'Brien I felt was quite an interesting choice for host, and I get, because he's sort of less of that chat show host that we perhaps see that much over here in the UK. I feel like Jimmy Kimmel is perhaps more of a recognisable face. I think Jimmy Kimmel even said Conan O'Brien did such a good job that they're thinking about getting Jay Leno next year. And it does feel a little bit kind of old-fashioned and regressive. Yeah, a little bit. Not that it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't that exciting. Yeah. I think they.
But is that who the audience are? Are the audience older folk?
Well, what are they trying to do? What are they trying to do at the Oscars? Are they trying to bring in younger audiences? Are they? Of course, everybody is. That's literally the point of everything, isn't it? To make sure that younger generations that want to watch it. Are they trying to just carry on? They know who their audience is. They're trying to keep them happy, or do they just kind of like splinch themselves a little bit and don't quite do either? Because they have this wicked medley right at the beginning, which I think was actually a really strong way to start the show, with Ariana Grande, Cynthia Erivo giving incredible performances, beautiful singing, standing ovations all round.
One of the most popular films of the year.
Oh, absolutely. And it already was. Everyone already knew the songs, but then to have those two singing them, brilliant. And then they had the Bond medley, which was so odd and kind of weirdly tone deaf. Odd performers to have doing the songs instead of the originals, who could easily have done it. Actually, that would have been amazing. Getting it like Adele or Madonna or Paul McCartney back. That was weird, and I thought they were maybe going to announce the next Bond. I was like, why are they doing this? They're leading up to something, and it didn't. Just felt like a bit of a wet fart. Yeah,
it's interesting on the ratings. So the ratings initially were a little bit lower. I think on the full count, sort of after a few days, it's gone a little bit above last year, which was sort of Barbenheimer time, and that was sort of seen as the peak.
That was.
It was also on Tubi, so it was on Hulu. I think so you could stream it sort of for the first time. Then they managed to chop off the end of it. Obviously, someone had set the schedule for we'll turn on the stream at this time and finish it at this time. So they lost, I think, the last two awards. Yeah. And who knew the Oscars overruns occasionally? Also on that age thing, they had Amelia de Moldenberg doing some of the red carpet. Good choice.
I love Amelia, and when I've talked to my class about her before, they do too. The kind of chicken shop dates are just perfect. kind of YouTube fodder, especially when it's Andrew Garfield, obviously. So yeah, I think that's really smart. ITV's coverage was slightly different and a bit odd and a bit random, having these two presenters on the red carpet that we didn't really know, and we didn't really know why they were there. But I think I genuinely think the interviews on ITV this year were much better than last year. I feel like they learned a lot. So that was good, at least. But I genuinely think Marina Hyde was talking about this on the Rest is Entertainment, that only 5% of Americans watch the Oscars, which is so small. And so every year on year it is becoming more and more irrelevant. And we don't really want to admit that because there's so much nostalgia tied in. You know, you might have grown up watching the Oscars. With Barbenheimer, at least everybody had seen those two main films pretty much, and so they were invested. That was why. And this year, I think people will go and see Anora, and I think there is enough buzz around it that if you haven't already, because it's won Oscars, that's a reason to see it, and that feels like a bit of a sea change.
Is it a good film?
It's a brilliant film. You absolutely should see it, and especially because it's not the worthy Oscar winner. That's The Brutalist. The Brutalist is also excellent, and I love that as well. I love cinema. You know, I am the person that will go and see a 3 hour 45-minute film with an interval and love it. But Nora is excellent, and also Sean Baker was, you know, in his win for Best Director. I know it's difficult to keep track of which award he did which speech for, but for Best Director, he was saying, make sure that you distribute films in cinemas. Please go and see films in the cinema. But again, you're preaching to the converted. For the people who are already watching the Oscars, they are going to be the ones who are seeing it in cinemas. The question is, how do we get people who've stopped going to the cinema back in? How do we get them to care again about all of these stars that they're seeing? Do they care about Adrian Brody? I sort of fear the answer is probably not, but maybe Mike E. Madison, maybe they do.
Christian, have you seen many of the Oscar-nominated films this year?
So could you tell I was sitting here watching you, and occasionally I was sort of nod when you mentioned a name, and inside I'm going, who? So I'm afraid I don't count as one of the as a younger person anymore that they're trying to lure in to watch, and I'm afraid I'm just more likely to stay up late to watch a US election than I am a US award show.
Well, did you see Conclave?
Yes.
There you go.
No, I did watch that.
How did I guess?
But I watched that, but not at the cinema. I watched it with my wife a couple of weekends ago because I'd read the book,
Me too,
and I thought, and I didn't really remember what it was about, but I remember thinking this was a great book, a classic Robert Harris kind of skullduggery and court intrigue, etc. Not much of which I felt made it into the film, so I didn't really enjoy the film.
Peter Strawn won an Oscar for that screenplay.
I tell you what, it was beautifully shot, it was absolutely lovely, and some of those fantastic images of cardinals outside smoking and scrolling, I would stay with me forever. I thought those were beautiful,
well,
really clever. But I'm afraid it didn't really do it for me overall.
I mean, it's interesting the economics of some of this, and we've got from one end you've got movie theatres and the other end streaming, but kind of in the middle, premium video on demand has become a real boon for some of these film companies and distributors. And when people are paying 20 and sometimes £30 for these to rent or to watch these movies, sort of transforms the model of movie making.
Yeah, it transforms everything, including sort of family finances. Because my children, 8 and 4, have only known this sort of on-demand world, and I think probably by household average, we probably got fewer streaming accounts than other people. Sort of people say, well, you've got to get Disney, now you need to get Discovery. And I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute, I've got Netflix and I've got Amazon. I mean, it can't be that many more. There's not enough hours in a day. And of course, there's iPlayer.
Yes.
So my kids are familiar with this, and we've had to sort of put all sorts of locks on who can buy what and who can rent what, and etc. And I'm the one that always checks, is it cheaper in SD? Wants me to get it in HD, but
That's it, you're just shivering. We talked about it earlier, Christian. You made a return to City AM, I guess, sort of middle of last year.
Yeah, August last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In your time away, what had changed? What had surprised you when you got back in the chair?
Everything has changed. So, like Donald Trump, I have returned for one term in office, and then I went off and did something else, and now I'm back again. So I did, but that's where the Trump similarities end.
Thank goodness.
I think. So I was editor at City AM from 2015 to the end of 2020. And when I started in that job, as previously just referenced, I was a bit of a curveball hire. I hadn't been a journalist before, and I was 28 years old, and everybody, including me, said this is a ridiculous idea, but I enjoyed it enormously. I had a great 5 years there, but leaving aside a sort of year of pandemic chaos and horror. But I actually told the owners at the time, at the end of 2019, that in 2020 I'm going to go, because I actually met my wife about a month before I started that job, and so she only ever knew me in that Sunday to Thursday finish at midnight rhythm, and we had kids, etc. So we'd come to peace with the fact that I was going to try and find something else to do, which I did for a few years out in corporate comms, which was very interesting, but I don't think we fell in love with each other. And so I had a bit of a wilderness year, where things weren't really landing for me in the way that I'd hoped, and I was really beginning to think about what to do, and sort of pick myself up and said, well, I'm going to have to launch something on my own, which I began to have some conversations about. And then I was saved from having to try to be an entrepreneur, because I'm not an entrepreneur, when the new owners of City AM got in touch and said, look, we've got an idea, and so they didn't have to twist my arm. So everything has changed, to answer your question. You know, the economics of journalism have changed, the world has changed, City AM's owners and offices have changed, the government has changed. So we do now 3 newspapers a week, which I think is great, because there's a real, big place in my heart for a physical product still. It goes to print a little earlier than the old Ofsted time of 1 a.m, thank goodness, but with so much more digital, as you would expect. I mean, the first time round, I used to say to the owners at the time things like, I think we should have an app. And they would say, not unreasonably, why would we encourage people not to pick up the newspaper? Because the newspaper at the time, 2016, 17, was like 90% of the revenues of the business. Now, that City AM is down in print ad spend, not down as much as other parts, because it's quite a specialised audience, but that trend is pretty clear. And so the digital focus now is enormous, which is great. So now we do have an app, and we have only launched last summer, I think. We have now more readers of the app each morning than there are printed copies of the newspaper. So we have about 160,000 readers on the app each morning. And the website is obviously much more important. Our digital syndication across loads of other platforms is hugely important. And we built our own studio space. I have to say, it's a little more corporate than this. This is very nice. Thank you for having us in your home, by the way.
It's my lovely lounge.
But we're doing, we have a lot of plans unfolding for a lot more activity in that space.
Do you think it's easier to be a specialist publication in today's world, where a lot of battling for clicks, a lot of people have opted out of that, doubling down on a vertical? Is that the way forward for journalism?
Yes, undoubtedly, and by specialised, that can be geographic, or it could be subject matter, and the hyper specialised kind of niche substacks are incredibly successful. And I know you had Jim Waterson here the other day, and there are others. If you look at what the Mill has been doing and their expansion, etc. So all power to them, because I think that sort of specialism is what's going to save the media. There are a handful of kind of high-walled, castled estates, your Bloombergs and FTs, etc. And now they will tell you they got their own problems, but on the whole, they're all right. And then, the rest of the media is. Gosh, I can think back of the number of different times we have tried, different commercial focuses, different experiments, different ways to sort of generate revenue, etc. And nobody's aced it really, other than the kind of very high paywall, high price point premium content. And indeed, right down at the other end of the scale, kind of paywalled, hyper specialised content, etc. Particularly, the media organisations that people don't really see. But if you work in insurance risk or derivatives trading, there is going to be a publication that's going to charge you £300 a month to read it, and you need access to it to do your job. So there's that as well. And
your boss will probably pay for it.
City AM is, it's in its 20th year. It'll turn 20 in September. And it's still free, and the app is free, and the video output is free, and the website is free, and the newspaper is free, and the magazine is free, etc. So for us to unpick that model would be a big step. There might be, of course, as you expect, experimental routes into that around partial paywalls and pro membership schemes and all those sorts of things you'd expect us to experiment with, which we are. But I'm very happy to say that City AM is in a good place at the moment. I feel like it's got momentum. I feel like I came in about a year after it was acquired by its new owners, and I'm now a sort of beneficiary of that. My predecessor, Andy, is a good friend of mine, as editor, was in post during that acquisition. And being acquired is a complicated thing, and for a business like City AM being folded into what was then a big PLC is a complicated thing. So I get to come in now, things are settled, and we have very, very patient, very supportive, very quiet owners, which is precisely as you would like them to be in a newspaper. I've had one sort of 2-minute conversation with our owner in 6 months. I'm sure if I was veering wildly off course, the phone would ring again. But I think City AM has spent 20 years building a good audience, and I'd like to think a good reputation.
And obviously sort of seen as a London title, but you're doing some stuff in some other places, doing something in Manchester as well?
Yeah, we do. We have reporters based in Manchester, working out of Manchester with a sort of specific brief of covering the non-London business landscape, which is obviously enormous. But it's also the case that we've got various syndication agreements, including with Reach publishers. So City AM provides a huge amount of the business and financial content across Reach stable of publications regionally and one or two of the nationals as well, which actually does force us into thinking outside of a listed London stock market bubble, even in the way we write. So we might have once written a story saying the London listed firm, which employs 6,000 people, is today announced X. We would probably now write the London listed firm, which employs 6,000 people, 300 of whom are in Liverpool.
Yes.
Right.
Has today announced X, because then you're going to find Liverpool media organisation goes, a relevant story. We'll take that. Thank you for through the syndication networks. But the syndication's huge. It's obviously Apple News is an enormous partner for us. Similarly now with Samsung, and syndicated across a number of other platforms as well. So one thing I have to remind myself constantly is that I can look at the live traffic to cityam.com. I probably have to times it by 10 to get an accurate view as to what the real figure is, because of all the different syndicated platforms.
Well, the news aggregators, and we talked about it a few weeks ago, for some publications are very large proportions of their digital audience, aren't they now?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's interesting because you start to think, is this cannibalizing our own... there's a huge amount of our commercial operation which is dependent on people coming to cityam.com. And we've got all these other routes now for people to consume CityAM content. It doesn't require going to cityam.com. And we have to adapt to that. You won't be surprised to learn that in addition to our sort of video and audio output, events is going to be a much bigger part of our portfolio. And we've got some big flagship events, but I think there's huge scope to do a lot more. And other publications are really good at that. If you look at The Spectator, for example, has always had a great events network, and happens to publish a magazine on the side. Great events and great magazine.
Yes.
So basically is what will be, I'm sure it won't be news to either of you, and it won't be news to the people who listen to or watch this show. In the media, really, you just have to try and run as fast as you can to stand still. Is quite often how it feels in the commercial sense, and every so often, the headwinds will die down, and you can make a bit of progress. But you got to keep running.
Well, Christian and Rhianna, don't run anywhere. We've got the quiz coming up next. Welcome back. Just enough time for the quiz. Let's see how much attention our guests have been paying to the media news this week. This week's quiz is entitled Perfect 10. 3 media stories from the week, all with one thing in common. The number 10 is in there somewhere. You could call this quiz tenuous. Right. It's a best of 3, so buzz in with your name if you know the answer. So Rhianna, you will say.
Rhianna.
And Christian, you will say.
Christian.
Let's play Perfect 10. Which news outlet has been offering £10 for social media pictures?
Rhianna. The Telegraph.
Yes, according to the Press Gazette, the minimum payment that's going to be offered, used to be offered by the paper, was £20 for online video grabs or £25 for digital-only picture use. Now it's a tenner. Is this the way it's all going, Christian?
Do you know, I first time round at CityAM, obviously you can imagine it's a newspaper and online, a huge amount of pictures we publish, and of course you want them all to be copyrighted and bought through license, etc. But every so often we get a letter from somebody who'll say, that drone shot of Westfield that you're running is mine, and I hereby now demand £300. And that used to happen once every few months. And now... well, let's just say it happens a lot more, because that entire industry of scraping around the internet looking for potential copyright infringements is entirely automated, and there are an absolute army of sort of AI-powered demands and bills being sent out. And actually, it's created an enormous amount of work to sort of push back and say, well, I think you'll find actually, and then you realize, hang on a minute, you don't exist. You're just a bot. But you have to engage. So sometimes you say fair cop, and sometimes we say, no, actually, here's the license, etc. But we need an industry around trying to prove who owns what image and the rights to it and what you're going to pay.
Okay, question number 2. Which game show, currently being touted to international sellers, has a cash prize of £10,000?
Christian,
Yes.
Supermarket Sweep.
Sadly,
No, I know it's not. It's Scrabble.
it is
But
Scrabble.
Supermarket Sweep was on my mind because I also read this week that someone's going to bring that back, but to YouTube, I think.
Oh,
okay.
natural
That's good.
home.
Yeah.
Yes, Scrabble. Fremantle acquired the distribution rights from Hasbro. Would you watch a Scrabble quiz show?
Okay, so
One overhead camera.
I have seen a clip of the US version,
Okay.
which is hosted by Raven from That's So Raven.
Yes.
If anyone remembers that.
Raven Simone.
Yeah, Raven or
Yep.
Simone. Yeah, and she was also in the Princess Diaries too. Fun fact. I really cannot get my head around why anybody would would watch this, except I guess it's the same people that would watch Catchphrase, or it feels so daytime TV. Not to say that there's not a place for it, but with Scrabble particularly, this is all about like unscrambling words on the screen quite slowly, and it's quite like I was just watching it going, yeah, it's hedge. Yeah, ankle. Yeah.
Maybe you should just go on it. Maybe that's
But it's,
maybe
I
that's the
can't,
key.
where's the tension coming from?
Yes.
Where's the jeopardy?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, question number 3. I think it's one each. So this for the win. Which production company's revenues have plummeted 77% since The Crown ended?
Rihanna.
Yes.
Left Bank.
Yes, this is Left Bank Pictures. Charlotte Moore's new home,
Charlotte Moore, yes.
boss of the BBC. The 10 Connection is staff received £10 million in bonuses in January for their work on The Crown. But yes, now they're looking for new shows to fill the gap, and that'll be Charlotte's job.
Scrabble.
I'm sure.
Yeah, Scrabble here is being touted. Dear England is one of the shows that they're working on, which I think will do well for them. But yes, nothing is going to top The Crown, is it?
Not even Meghan's new show.
Have you watched it yet?
The number of calls that I got from people wanting me to comment on Meghan's new show, had to let them all down very gently and say, I've not seen it and I'm not going to.
Well, as you've won, you can come back next time and tell us what you think of Meghan Markle's new TV show on Netflix. Thank you to both of you for joining us. Christian, how can people keep up with your work?
Well, you go to cityam.com or download the City AM app.
And Rhianna?
You can listen to the Six Music Breakfast Show. I told you it was Insider. Every Friday I'm on doing my film reviews, and you can also listen to the Penguin podcast, which is coming back soon, hopefully.
Available wherever you're listening to this.
Exactly.
I'm sure. Thank you for listening and watching as well. My name's Matt Deegan. The producer was Matt Hill. It was a Rethink audio production with video support from Podcast Discovery. Remember, you can go to themediaclub.com and sign up for our free Substack. You get an update about the show, and we find out a little bit about you. So remember to go to themediaclub.com and sign up. And I'll see you next week.